Friday, August 28th, 2020, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I'm going to talk about how Americans are being distracted and divided by politics as the biggest heist in history ensues. I know it's a controversial opinion. I believe politics is just a distraction. It's kabuki theater. I know many people take sides, but I don't, because we need to follow the money and see who's really in charge. And I've decided to look at, someone asked me yesterday if I have a reading list of books. I do. But what I'm going to do today is recommend Congressman Mcfadden on the Federal Reserve Corporation, Remarks in Congress, 1934, an astounding exposure. I'm not going to go through the whole remarks he made in Congress because it's quite long, but I'm going to put a link in the description to it. So you can read that. It's also an electronic book. There's a function here. You click on it and it reads it for you if you don't want to read it. Before I do that, let's quickly look at where the markets are this morning. Yesterday was a very interesting day, of course. We saw the stock market and precious metals rally strongly on the remarks of Fed Chairman Jay Powell. And then we saw precious metals come off significantly. The stock market came off quite a bit as well. We saw the Dow finish up 160 and the S&P up only about 6 points. And the NASDAQ finished lower on the day, about 40 points. So right now, it's 7:50 a.m. London. We've got spot gold at 1946.50. So we're up about 17, just under 1%. Range has been 1949 to 1922. Silver is at 27.40, up 40 cents or 1.4%. Range has been 26.81 to 27.48. So precious metals still consolidating. My opinion on precious metals, of course, has not changed. The Dow future is up 196 or just under 0.75%. S&P future is up 22, up 0.2% at 3507. And the NASDAQ 100 future is up 65 or 0.5%, just under 12,000. So what about the currencies? Yeah, we're seeing the dollar come off. Not surprising, with comments from Jay Powell saying that the Fed is ready to run their CPI, or what they call their measure of inflation, above 2% to make sure they average 2% CPI or inflation, whatever you want to call it. So right now, sterling is up just under 0.5% at 132.62. We've got the euro up 1/3 at 118.60. We've got the dollar down 1/3 versus the yen at 106.18. And the dollar is down 1/3 as well against the yuan at 686.70. WTI crude is down slightly, virtually unchanged at 43.07. And I've noticed that the bond yields have gone up a little bit here. The 10-year is up almost 10 basis points from yesterday at 0.77. Are we going to see a spike in yields now? Are people concerned about inflation after Powell's speech? No, I don't think so. I think this is just temporary. I think Wall Street and the big investors are still deluded. They still believe in the Federal Reserve. They still trust the Federal Reserve, unlike us, right? So that's where the markets are. So now let's go to Congressman Mcfadden's speech. There's so many distractions right now, as most of you know, of course. I try to keep an eye on them, but I try not to get too bogged down on them. But I can see what's going on from the outside, of course, here in the UK, what's going on in the US in terms of division, huge division in the US between left and right, social upheaval as well, some social upheaval. Yeah, that seems to be encouraged even by the big corporate interests linked to the monetary system, to the central banks. I mean, just an example, a couple weeks ago, I decided to watch some golf, and I don't subscribe to Sky Sports. What I did, though, is once in a while, I'll go into what's called Now TV and buy, let's say, a week of sport to watch the golf. Usually it's a major, so it was the PGA Championship. So I was watching that. And on the leaderboard, Sky Sports leaderboard, they had a little box underneath, Black Lives Matter. And I'm not going to give my opinion on it, but I just don't think it's a place for a sports TV program to be touching upon those things. So I won't be financing Sky Sports anymore. Too bad. I won't watch the golf. It doesn't matter really. It's not the end of the world. So that's how it's getting. A lot of distractions. And it's not just the division and the politics. And of course, the big crisis of 2020 that I don't have to tell you what it is, right? So on to Congressman Mcfadden. I had read this many years ago. And it's a great address to Congress, a great speech. So I'll go through what it really is here first, and then I'll go through the introduction that Mcfadden gives to Congress about the Federal Reserve System, and then I'll jump to where I think we are today, but there's a lot more in between that I recommend everyone read the whole astounding exposure. It's about 23 pages, but I have to say some people, or most people, and even I, have to be very thorough when reading this, and maybe even reading it twice to fully understand what Mr. Mcfadden is talking about. On May 23rd, 1933, Congressman Louis T. Mcfadden brought formal charges against the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Bank System, the controller of the currency, and the Secretary of the United States Treasury for numerous criminal acts, including but not limited to conspiracy, fraud, unlawful conversion, and treason. The petition of articles of impeachment was thereafter referred to the Judiciary Committee and has yet to be acted on. So this electronic booklet should be reprinted, reposted, set up on web pages, and circulated far and wide. This is probably the kind of thing they won't teach you at school or at university in an economics class, in a class about the Federal Reserve, right? Congressman Mcfadden on the Federal Reserve Corporation, Remarks in Congress, 1934. So I think the articles of impeachment, the petition was in 33, but his remarks were in 1934. Let's just see what they say here about the speech. Congressman Mcfadden's speech on the Federal Reserve Corporation. Quotations from several speeches made on the floor of the House of Representatives by the Honorable Louis T. Mcfadden of Pennsylvania. Mr. Mcfadden, due to his having served as chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee for more than 10 years, was the best posted man on these matters in America and was in a position to speak with authority of the vast ramifications of this gigantic private credit monopoly. As representative of a state which was among the first to declare its freedom from foreign money tyrants, it is fitting that Pennsylvania, the cradle of liberty, be again given the credit for producing a son that was not afraid to hurl defiance in the face of the money bund. Whereas Mr. Mcfadden was elected to the high office on both the Democratic and Republican tickets, there can be no accusation of partisanship lodged against him, because these speeches are set out in full in the private congressional record. They carry weight that no amount of condemnation of the part of private individuals could hope to carry. So as you can see, Congressman Mcfadden knew what he was talking about. He was chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee for more than 10 years, okay? So this is how he starts his address to Congress. The Federal Reserve, a corrupt institution. Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks, herein after called the Fed. The Fed has cheated the government of these United States and the people of the United States out of enough money to pay the nation's debt. The depredations and iniquities of the Fed has cost enough money to pay the national debt several times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of these United States, has bankrupted itself, and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the defects of the law under which it operates, through the maladministration of the law by the Fed, and through the corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it. Some people who think that the Federal Reserve Bank's United States government institutions, they are private monopolies which prey upon the people of these United States for the benefit of themselves and their foreign customers. Wow, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? In the collapse of '08, we found out that the Fed lent out trillions to foreign banks, right? And they didn't want to tell Congress. I think it was Congressman Grayson asked them who they lent the money to, and Bernanke said, "No, we can't tell you." So there you go. Nothing's changed. Foreign and domestic speculators and swindlers, rich and predatory moneylender. In the dark crew of financial pirates, there are those who would cut a man's throat to get $1 out of his pocket. There are those who send money into states to buy votes to control our legislatures. There are those who maintain international propaganda for the purpose of deceiving us into granting of new concessions which will permit them to cover up their past misdeeds and set again in motion their gigantic train of crime. I think this is significant because here he's covering the period after the crash of '29, it's in 1934, and how the Federal Reserve also bailed out all their friends back then. So they done it again in '08, '09, and they're doing it again right now under the cover of a pandemic, right? And there are a lot of people out there who think, who are saying that the Treasury's taken over the Federal Reserve. Well, I think it's the other way around. If the United States government or the Treasury had taken over the Federal Reserve, we wouldn't see the national debt going up, right? And the Federal Reserve's balance sheet or its assets exploding higher. We would be seeing the opposite, right? We would be seeing the Treasury telling the Federal Reserve to liquidate all its assets, and the Treasury could then write off all the debt, right? That's what would be happening. Wake up, people. It's the Federal Reserve that's in charge, not the Treasury. These 12 private credit monopolies were deceitfully and disloyally foisted upon this country by the bankers who came here from Europe and repaid us our hospitality by undermining our American institutions. These bankers took money out of this country to finance Japan in the war against Russia. They created a reign of terror in Russia with our money in order to help that war along. They instigated the separate peace between Germany and Russia and thus drove a wedge between the Allies in World War. They financed Trotsky's passage from New York to Russia so that he might assist in the destruction of the Russian Empire. They fomented and instigated the Russian Revolution and placed a large fund of American dollars at Trotsky's disposal in one of their branch banks in Sweden so that through him, Russian homes might be thoroughly broken up and Russian children flung far and wide from their natural protectors. They have since begun breaking up American homes and the dispersal of American children. Mr. Chairman, there should be no partnership in matters concerning banking and currency affairs in this country, and I do not speak with any. In 1912, the National Monetary Association, under the chairmanship of the late Senator Nelson W. Aldrich, made a report and presented a vicious bill called the National Reserve Association Bill. This bill is usually spoken of as the Aldrich Bill. Senator Aldrich did not write the Aldrich Bill. He was a tool, if not the accomplice, of the European bankers who for nearly 20 years had been scheming to set up a central bank in this country and who in 1912 had spent and were continuing to spend vast sums of money to accomplish their purpose. We were opposed to the Aldrich plan for a central bank. The men who ruled the Democratic Party then promised the people that if they were returned to power, there would be no central bank established here while they held the reins of government. 13 months later, that promise was broken, and the Wilson administration, under the tutelage of those sinister Wall Street figures who stood behind Colonel House, established here in our free country the worm-eaten monarchical institution of the King's Bank to control us from the top downward and from the cradle to grave. The Federal Reserve Bank destroyed our old and characteristic way of doing business. It discriminated against our one-name commercial paper, the finest in the world, and it set up an antiquated two-name paper, which is the present curse of this country and which wrecked every country which has ever given it scope. It fastened down upon the country the very tyranny from which the framers of the Constitution sought to save us. So now I'm going to skip to the part where he talks about Roosevelt and the international bankers. It reminded me very much of the current president. I know a lot of you might not agree with me, but that's the way I see it. So the interesting thing about what Mr. Mcfadden talks about in his address to Congress is that it's very similar to what's going on today. It's very similar to what went on in '08. Wall Street and these bankers always get bailed out. And they get bailed out because, as he says, the Federal Reserve System has access to the credit of the nation. That's what's been done. I think that's the big, really the real big crime here. So let's go through Roosevelt and the international bankers. Roosevelt did what the international bankers ordered him to do. Do not deceive yourself, Mr. Chairman, or permit yourself to be deceived by others into the belief that Roosevelt's dictatorship is in any way intended to benefit the people of the United States. He's preparing to sign on the dotted line. He's preparing to cancel the war debts by fraud. He's preparing to internationalize this country and destroy our Constitution itself in order to keep the Fed intact as a money institution for foreigners. Mr. Chairman, I see no reason why citizens of the United States should be terrorized and surrendering their property to international bankers who own and control the Fed. The statement that gold would be taken from its lawful owners if they did not voluntarily surrender it to private interests showed that there is an anarchist in our government. So sounds very familiar to today. Oh, you have to do this. It's voluntary. We're not telling you to do it. But if you don't do it, we're going to force you to do it, right? The statement that it is necessary for the people to give their gold, the only real money. So there you go. Louis T. Mcfadden knew what real money was, right? Only real money. To the banks in order to protect the currency is a statement of calculated dishonesty. By his unlawful usurpation of power on the night of March 5th, 1933, and by his proclamation, which in my opinion was in violation of the Constitution of the United States, Roosevelt divorced the currency of the United States from gold, and the United States currency is no longer protected by gold. It is therefore sheer dishonesty to say that the people's gold is needed to protect the currency. This is also a message to Harry Dent, who doesn't understand gold, who doesn't understand really what a currency, a sound currency is, who thinks what we have today is a strong currency, that it's a safe haven. I heard him say on the Kiyosaki show that U.S. Treasuries are the best place to be, safer than gold. I mean, the guy hasn't done his homework, right? I guess he wasn't taught about Louis T. Mcfadden at Harvard. Roosevelt ordered the people to give their gold to private interests, that is, to banks, and he took control of the banks so that all the gold and gold values in them or given into them might be handed over to the predatory international bankers who own and control the Fed. Roosevelt cast his lot with the usurers. He agreed to save the corrupt and dishonest at the expense of the people of the United States. Sounds familiar. Happened in 08-09. It's happening now again. The people of the United States and the world, for that matter, are again bailing out the international banks. Don't forget, this crisis started in September last year, the repo market crisis within the banking system. He took advantage of the people's confusion and weariness and spread the dragnet over the United States to capture everything of value that was left in it. He made a great haul for the international bankers. The Prime Minister of England came here for money. He came here to collect cash. He means gold by cash. He came here with Fed currency and other claims against the Fed, which England had bought up in all parts of the world, and he has presented them for redemption in gold. Mr. Chairman, I am in favor of compelling the Fed to pay their own debts. I see no reason why the general public should be forced to pay the gambling debts of the international bankers. So there you go. Nothing has changed since 1933-34. We're doing the same thing today. We did the same thing in 08-09, not only in the US, but all around the world. We keep bailing out the banks at the expense of the general public, because this phony fiat currency that is issued to bail out the banks is backed by taxpayers, and all this debt is lumbered onto us. It also dilutes the fiat currency, of course, because it's not real currency and we are forced to use it by legal tender laws. So yes, it would be fun to talk about Trump or Biden, all the divisions and everything, and who's going to win, who's ahead, what would happen if one would win or the other. I hear a lot of people saying, well, at least Trump would give us some time to save ourselves. With Biden, everything would go down really quickly. But I don't think it really matters who wins when you know what's really going on, when you know who's really in charge and has been in charge since, probably 1914 when they started operating, but really in charge since 1933 when they really put their men in the White House, and that man actually stole the property of millions of Americans to bail out international bankers who own the Federal Reserve, right? We know the 12 branches of this Federal Reserve System, that they're all private corporations. So I highly recommend this address of Congressman Mcfadden to Congress. And if I was going to read anything right now or tell anyone to read anything right now, especially with what's going on in the world, it would be his address to Congress about the Federal Reserve. And it not only affects Americans, but everyone around the world, because we have a king's bank here in the UK as well. It's called the Bank of England. Europeans have a king's bank. It's called the European Central Bank. The Swiss have a king's bank. It's called the Swiss National Bank, which is doing something very similar to what the Fed did in the 30s. They're using the credit of the Swiss people to buy risky stocks, right? It's a privately owned bank as well, partly privately owned, and also owned by the Swiss cantons. Don't be distracted by politics, divisions. Keep an eye on the money and make sure you keep yours safe. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms below here. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.